Ready for brand stories? Get inspired and learn from thought leaders, CEOs, business owners, managers, entrepreneurs, and experts who tell their brand stories and share their first-hand insights. Welcome to BrandsTalk. I'm your host, Brigitte Bakowski. I support entrepreneurs and organizations to become future market leaders by transforming their ambitions and passion into an online brand that radiates beauty, brilliance, and authenticity, attracting the clients and recognition they deserve. Let's get started and dive with me into the world of brands. My guest today is Megan Dougherty. Megan is a digital marketing strategist with a background in online development and course creation. She has had the opportunity over the years to work with hundreds of business owners in a huge variety of industries. She co-founded One Stone Creative in 2017 with Audra Casino, bringing together content marketing strategy and broadcast audio experience to create high-value podcasts for business owners, marketing managers, public speakers, and nonfiction authors. In 2021, One Stone Creative developed a business podcast blueprint to help companies and executives dial into the specific ways they can leverage a podcast for their content marketing and business development goals. Megan is also the creator of the Podcasting for Business conference. I warmly welcome Megan Dougherty. Welcome to BrandsTalk.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm just delighted to be here with you today.
I'm delighted to have you today on my show. Yesterday I was your guest, so today you are here in the spotlight.
I love when we get to do this.
Yes, on BrandsTalk. So I'm really excited having you because you have so much wisdom on podcasting, and especially for corporations. This is a kind of another level of going into podcasting. But before we dive into that, I would like to know more about your personal journey, your story of how you got there where you are at now.
Well, it's funny. I never set out to work in podcasting. So the way that the company started is I was at Professional Loose Ends. I was in between opportunities. I'd left the company where I did a lot of my beginning and growing in the industry. And I was taking projects, doing different things. And one day I got a random call from a former colleague at that company, and that was Audra Casino. And without any preamble, she says, "You want to start a business together?" And I said, "Well, with you, absolutely. Let's do it." And so we looked at what she could do and what I could do. And I was a digital marketing strategist, and she was a broadcast and multimedia audio expert. So it's like, okay, we put these together. What can we do? We can make podcasts for business owners because that's the marriage of our expertise. And so we started doing that in 2017, and we've been doing it ever since. Now we're a team of 6 people internationally, and we produce over a dozen podcasts every week.
Wow, what a love marriage, business-wise, I would say.
We call it, she is like my work spouse, and one of my dearest friends.
That's beautiful. Okay, let's go into it. I think there's a lot of people that think about podcasting, companies that think about, okay, let's add on another communication channel, which is podcasting. And they're not quite sure whether they should go for it, whether this is a good extension of their brand communication. How do you determine if podcast is a good strategy for your business, for your corporation, for your small medium enterprise, maybe also for micro companies or even startups?
Yeah, and I love talking about this because it's such an important question that not enough companies ask before they start a podcast. Because as you know, podcasting, it's everywhere. It's popular. It seems like everyone's doing it. Every company's got a podcast. We need a podcast too. You got to slow down and think about things a little bit.
Be strategic.
Exactly. Yeah. So the question you've got to ask first is, what do we need for the business? What are the gaps in our current marketing strategy? What are the goals that we have for the company? Can a podcast fill those goals? Can it help meet those objectives? And that's the first level of analysis that you want to do. So, for example, if I'm looking at my business and I know that we really need, I need a better professional network. I need to know more people so that we can do co-promotions, we can get referrals, send them back and forth, and we can co-create really awesome opportunities. That's a big gap in my business. Can a podcast help me fill that? Well, absolutely. Will you be on my podcast is an amazing way to start a new relationship with a new person. It's a great relationship building tool, and it can be really effective for that. So to fill that business need, a podcast can be really, really effective. Other needs might be, content for the social media calendar. If you've got a larger organization, it can really be great for company culture. The CEO can create a podcast that is internal for members of a really large organization and make them all feel connected and cohesive. So it comes down to, what do we need to add to or streamline or make more effective in the business? And can a podcast, as a multimedia format, help us achieve those goals? If the answer is yes, you should start a podcast. If the answer is no, then no, you should be spending your time on other ways. Maybe, paid traffic is a better thing if you need a lot of customers of low ticket items. Or just looking at what do you need? Can a podcast do it the most efficiently? And then go for it.
Oh, amazing. What I like so much about what you just said is also the internal perspective. A podcast that facilitates internal communication and shapes
It really can.
an organizational culture. I totally like that idea, especially for the really big ones, maybe international companies that are working across cultures and
Oh, yeah.
across teams, everything. I think that brings people together, that connects people, fosters relationships on a completely different level. I like that.
Oh, it does. And it can be used for specifically that purpose too. So I know some larger organization in Canada. They have an internal podcast to introduce team members to each other who work across the country and would never otherwise meet. So every week they feature a different member of the company. And it's an interview with them. So they all get to know each other. And everyone loves it. Everyone loves the podcast.
Amazing. I like that. All right, let's go to the next step. Now, we have decided we're gonna start with a podcast. How do you effectively integrate a podcast into the overall brand or company strategy for maximum impact?
Oh, I love that question too. And the first thing is, whose job is it? This is such an important question as well, because very often a podcast gets started and it gets kind of dumped on the desk of whoever brought it up or that person's assistant or intern. And that can be a really challenging position to be, because a podcast is a project that has a lot of moving parts. It has a huge amount of potential upsides in terms of, relationships, content, repurposing, long-term projects that can all go into that. They take dedicated management. You've got to be paying a lot of attention to making sure everything's happening at the right time, and that if there's repurposing, it's not getting backburnered. So the first thing to integrate it into your marketing is who's in charge of the podcast, and assigning it to one person who's going to drive that project forward and make sure that, the goals are set and they're being met. And then in integrating it with other things, that person having access is really important as well to other marketing teams or other marketing, elements within the company. So if there's a really robust blog that the company has been running for a really long time, the person in charge of the podcast and the person in charge of the blog should be talking to make sure that depending on the strategy, the content is either going to be complementary or not covering the same thing at the same time, so they can kind of double their reach. And those are both legitimate strategies, but you've got to choose one so there's cohesiveness across all of the marketing. And then on the other end of things, there's got to be really great communication with the social media team. Because they're, on the ground, they're out there engaging with people on the different platforms the company may be using. They're going to have really good insight as to what might make interesting podcast episodes. So that two-way communication between all implicated departments and careful planning. This is, I call it the bad news of podcasting. It's not an easy project. You can't just turn on your mic and talk if you want it to be a really effective tool for your business, because you've got to figure out what it's going to do. That's the goal. How it's going to do that. That's the format. That's the release cadence. That's who's in charge of it. And how are you going to tell if it's working or not? Because a lot of the time people start podcasting and they're like, yeah, this is going well. Getting some good feedback. I think it's happening. But you ask them, okay, how do you know it's going well? And it's really hard to point at a number. So I know you do this kind of work a lot, trying to measure the intangibles of, brand and of work. And it's challenging.
Oh, yeah.
But it's possible. It just takes work. It's not an easy thing to measure, but you can measure. So things like new relationships that you've built. How many referrals have they sent you? How many times has your calendar booking said, I heard about you on the podcast? Always update your calendar to include where did you hear about us? And looking at maybe other things. How much time were you able to save within your company? Because the social media team had all these beautiful audiograms they could use instead of having to create things from scratch. And how much time was saved maybe in the sales process? Is the sales cycle shorter? Because now you're talking to people who have heard the host and they understand the company at this more intimate level. And they don't say, prove to me I should hire you and we should work together. They say, when can we start?
Mhm.
I love your stuff. When can we start? And that's a huge difference to cash flow. So it's deciding kind of how you're going to be using this podcast and what you're going to measure to, make it successful. That's kind of how it fits in with your broader strategic plan in marketing and, even in finance and other areas of the business.
Yeah. What I really like about that, what you have mentioned, is kind of the prerequisites, because podcasting is not just an extension, but it's integrated in the whole communications strategy. So there needs to be synergies, and departments need to communicate internally with each other. We do not have silo departments like in earlier days, right? Where we had all the, broadcasting and narrowcasting, if there was narrowcasting at all. But, different departments responsible for different things, talking about different things. And communication gets dispersed and customer confused. So there needs to be this multiplier effect and complementary way of doing things. So departments have to communicate with each other. So I think that's one of the major success factors, let's put it like that, what I've experienced working within corporations, that you need to get people have a common vision when it comes to, okay, now we are integrating in a podcast, and how do we do that? So they need to go into one direction, right? And understand what they're here for and what everyone is contributing to that success of integrating that. Do you have any other practical tips or even strategies that help to integrate this new communications channel of podcasting within the whole organizational setting? Is there anything that you think, I need to communicate that because it's another crucial factor that adds up to success long term?
Absolutely. And this one, I'm so sorry in advance because it's very boring. It's a very boring thing.
Nothing is boring. What is important?
It is to solve kind of the problems that you're talking about and making sure there is this integration. There needs to be a central brain and repository for the podcast with all of the information about the show that does not exist in an individual human's head. So we call this an episode guide when we're talking about it, and it lists every single episode, its release date, the guest name, the guest social handles, all of the links that are associated with it, links to folders that have all of the other assets in it. Sometimes it even includes keywords, if it's part of specific campaigns, if it's on specific topics. All of that in one place that everyone who ever touches the podcast needs to know it exists and how to consult it. Because then the questions that cause problems, when is this releasing? When's the last time we talked about widgets? Those are all answered by the guide. And that's going to be the biggest practical thing you can do to make podcasting easier is religiously updating this document. You can even plan out what's happening in advance. And the more work you put into maintaining this, the easier it's going to be to repurpose. The easier it's going to be for the social team to pull out related content. The easier it's going to be to make sure that, okay, in November, we've got a really big event. We've got to make sure all of our content is about that big event. It's all in the guide and not in a person's head, because when it's in somebody's head, they're the bottleneck. Everything that's going to be happening, and that causes a real problem. And you end up just backburnering it, saying, oh, we'll get it next time. And then your podcast is going to start losing traction, losing results. It's not going to sound as good. It's not going to perform well. And you're going to be like, but what happened? And it's because you didn't do the boring stuff.
Yeah, but I don't consider it as boring at all, because, and I'm sure there are a lot of other nerds out there. Like I think I'm guilty of that too, because I like to organize things and have to have everything in structure. In case of any irregularities, you have to be flexible, but you have to have a foundation you can work from and work with. So I think having something in a spreadsheet that gives you all the information that you need, that you can share with others, and everyone is on the same page. So I think that is, I don't consider this as boring at all. I think this is a brilliant point and a really important point to mention. Thank you so much, Megan.
And for those who are thinking about starting podcasts and you need to choose that one person to be in charge of the project, make it a nerd who likes spreadsheets.
Yes.
That's a great person to put in charge of the project.
Okay, so first of all, you need a podcast nerd.
Yeah, you need a podcast nerd.
Absolutely.
And if you don't have one, you can hire one. Store-bought is fine.
Okay. So this nerd also need to have a sense of, let's say, a sense for authenticity.
Hmm.
Because I think that is also something that is really important when having a podcast. So what do you think, what role does authenticity play for you, as someone offering such services? What does authenticity play in the success of a business podcast? And how can a host ensure and maintain that authenticity when
Hmm.
delivering a message? How does that
Oh,
work?
and that's such a great and important question, because it, there's underlying principles of authenticity. Say things that are
Hmm.
true, be yourself, that are going to be true all the times. But there's also different types of podcasts that exist for different reasons, and they do have kind of different ways you need to approach the way you're presenting this face to the world. So a podcast that's ultimate goal is just relationship building. That's kind of the podcast that I have. My company podcast mostly exists so that I can, build cool relationships with great people, have wonderful conversations, and make good content that our audience can enjoy. But because it's so personal focused and development, and two-way communication with another human focused, for me it's a lot more casual, because it is about making someone feel comfortable and getting to know them, and that's kind of the prime directive, if you will, if the podcast. Now, if we had a podcast that was more outward facing, you know what, I would maybe change my background a little bit so that it looked a little bit less like the personal room in my home, that I wanted to look a little more polished. We might also change the way we edited to maybe be a little more aggressive on some of those voice sounds and voice tics. Not to change who we are entirely, but to make sure that we're really presenting at the level we want our company to be perceived at. It's not inauthentic, because that's our authentic goal. But you can make these changes while still being comfortable in and of yourself and being, honest and being straightforward, to alter how you're perceived. And that's, a choice. It's your podcast. You get to do what you want with it. And I think it's really good to go into that with intentionality, and just on a kind of small micro level. A lot of people do really worry about how they sound. We have a lot of anxiety about our voices,
Too high.
and
Mm, yeah,
yeah,
very
and
often.
or maybe you feel like you've got a little vocal fry, or you feel like maybe you talk up and you sound a little nervous. And first of all, your voice is perfect, exactly as it is. And second of all, you can really take a minute before recording to just kind of center yourself to ground, maybe do a couple of vocal exercises, even if it feels weird, and you will just sound more like yourself, or at least more like yourself as others hear you. Because, of course, as you know, what we hear in our heads is very different than what other people hear in their heads. It's a strange phenomenon, but it can be disorienting. But, how you sound is a big part of your personality and who you are.
Yeah, exactly. So how we hear ourselves, like the internal voice, and how others perceive us is often very different, right? And
Yeah.
I think we come across higher than we think we are. So we have to
Hmm.
go on a lower level, basically. Um, yeah, but I think these tonations come from nervousness and
Hmm.
insecurities, I suppose. So it's all about training and repetition. Um, in that case, if I don't know, what would you suggest to do? Is there some training we can go through? What would be a guide or a coach that helps us to overcome that and really sets us up to become a
Yeah.
good podcast host and presenter, to be in this presence that needs to be?
Oh, what an interesting question, because there's a lot of different kinds of training and development that you can get. And so, I mean, so there's one angle you might take, and that's, I just want to be more comfortable with my voice how it is. I want to love it.
Mhm.
I want to like it. I want to let it sing right and true. So that, maybe a personal development, working on esteem and confidence could be a really good resource for you. If you want to have more, let's say, intentionality and control over how your voice sounds when you're talking to people, there are vocal experts and vocal trainers, who can really help you understand tool of your voice and how to use it in different ways. And so any kind of vocal coach would be really great at giving you that sort of that power and control over your voice. And then you can also look at it in terms of, what is the goal for the specific podcast? Do we need to, maybe it's not so much the voice, maybe it's the post-production that we can really alter things and kind of change how it sounds with it's amazing how a little bit of music can very much change how your voice is perceived. So maybe it's not a pre-production issue, maybe it's a post-production issue. So there's lots of different areas to explore and lots of different resources you can use. The final thing you might want to consider is it's not a voice issue, it's an interviewing or a hosting issue. And in that case, you might want to look at courses on how to kind of create a really interesting conversation, study how to create narratives, how to maybe extract information from someone who's not so forthcoming. And there's great training you can get on all of that as well. So there's as much to learn as you would like to learn, really, about kind of this vocal medium.
Wow, I really like your perspective on this thing, on our voice. I have never thought about that as you explain it right now. So I think there is lots to take away from this conversation today. Thank you so much, Megan. So if companies are still not quite sure of starting a podcast because there are still kind of misconceptions about podcasting out there, and is this really something a business should incorporate, and isn't that a waste of time? Are there any these objections that you can address and say, no, actually not, to round it up?
What is if someone is, and sometimes I call them Podcurious. So they're thinking about it, but maybe not quite sure, maybe not ready to take the plunge. For a company, I often recommend starting with a limited release podcast season. So a podcast that goes on forever is a really big commitment. And a podcast that kind of starts and stops and doesn't have a consistent release flow is a bad look for any company.
Yeah.
But if you say, we're going to do 8 episodes on our key topic, answering the key questions that our customers have, and that's going to be the whole project. That's going to be a standalone thing. It's a podcast. You'll get a chance to promote it, see if your team likes it, see if your audience likes hearing it from you in this way. It'll be something you can really use and reuse again and again. It'll be very evergreen if you design it well.
Yeah.
And that can really prove the use case of the podcast. If everyone who's involved in the project is like, this sucked, I don't want to do it again, you don't have to. And you didn't fail, you didn't pod fade, you didn't be inconsistent. You started and finished a project.
And it's a standalone thing, right?
Yeah.
It's a standalone thing. It can be there if you continue or not. Nobody ever would question it, right?
Precisely. So we do a lot of standalone kind of limited release seasons for people when they're starting out. And sometimes it's one and done. And that's great. And other times they're like, this was the best thing we've ever done. We have to do this all the time. And that's great too. So there's no lose when you do it this way.
Yeah. And it's also something you can learn from and pivot, doing it differently the next time, coming up with a second season, highlighting different aspects of your business. I think that is a wonderful idea. So if you are Podcurious, I love that expression. It's a great term. I think I'm going to use that too.
Please do.
All right. And when it comes in particular to podcasts, how would you measure engagement just for podcasts? Is it really about downloads? What do you measure here to get a real good picture of it?
Amazing question. And I'm going to refer you back to my very first answer to your very first question during this conversation is what is the goal of the podcast? Because if my goal is to, again, I'll use my own show as an example, to build great relationships. I don't care how many downloads there are. That's not a meaningful metric to me. I mean, of course, you keep an eye on it just so you know. But like what really matters to me is how many more people do I have that I can, share a great opportunity with? Or who are going to tell me when they do something really cool so that we can go back and forth like that. That's the meaningful metric for me. That's good engagement for me. Another one I track personally is because we send an email whenever we release a podcast episode. And I do track the number of people who respond to it to say, hey, this was helpful. This was useful. I learned something, or I checked out this guest. And that if that number is going up, that means I'm doing a really good job getting the right information to the right people. And that for me is personally meaningful, but also means that my company is being seen as a trusted resource. And that's an important metric for me as well. So we've got kind of a library and that One Stone Creative, and this is part of the business podcast blueprints that you mentioned so kindly in the introduction, 15 different metrics that measure different things and can be interpreted in different ways to track business outcomes really to the work of podcasting. And that's what we look at for success. To be honest, it's very rarely downloads.
Okay.
It's usually not that number that makes a big difference to companies.
Yeah, but that's the one metric that everyone is measuring. How many downloads did they get?
It's the easiest one to get.
Yes, and it's one metric. It's a silver metric. It doesn't tell the whole story. So we need to have a kind of a more holistic picture
Mhm.
on that, right? Okay, so now I would love to switch gears a little bit and talk
Okay, let's
about
do it.
you and your company in terms of branding.
Okay.
Can you share the inspiration behind your company name, One Stone Creative? Because it's a very unusual name. I would really like you to share it with our audience because it's a very nice story to tell.
Have you ever heard the expression, killing two birds with one stone?
Sure.
That's where we got the idea to name the company, because we wanted to create content that was going to have multiple uses within a business. And so we decided that every piece of content would be like that stone that, I mean, it's a kind of a violent analogy when you think about it, that gets the two birds, but it serves multiple purposes. So that's how we ended up, and we went back and forth for ages on the name.
Yeah.
We could not think of something until I think it was one of our mutual friends just said, "You guys always kill two birds with one stone when you make content." And we're like, "That's it. That's the name right there." I find naming is so interesting, and I'm sure you've got great stories about this, but I often find, like, for podcast names and titles, it's going to come up in conversation. And the person who is hosting the podcast, the person who dreamed it up, is at some point going to say something that is the perfect name. And they're not going to realize they said it, but you have to just learn to hear it.
Yeah.
And when you hear it, you know it, and it's good. So I think that's what happened with our name, too.
It's so interesting because I kind of came up already with a name, but maybe I will integrate Podcurious into our episode. I think that would be great to do so.
Sounds
Because
great. I would
that's
love
what I
that.
remember is coming up and it totally sticks with me now.
Some things are sticky.
Absolutely. The unusual, but maybe it's something that really turns into something permanent as
Yeah.
a definition, as a term. And there's a lot of new terms out there that become a name for a category, like brands becoming names for a category like Kleenex or Let's Uber or FedEx. Yeah. So now let's talk to Podcurious, right?
Always.
Yeah. And then, I mean, you are one player of several players or many players in the market offering these kind of services. So how does One Stone Creative differentiates itself from all the others in the realm of podcasting services for your branding purposes?
For branding purposes, it's because our focus, I think, is very much on the value of a podcast to a business. So a lot of the industry, and there's great people in this industry. I love the podcasting industry. It's mostly people who are really, giving, really energetic, really enthusiastic and kind. But a lot of the, training and the support and the production out there is for different kinds of podcasts. So it's podcasts that are passion projects that are done kind of because you love it and you want to build community and you want to change the world and make an impact. And it's essentially a valuable hobby. And then there are podcasts that exist to be businesses in and of themselves. So someone wants to start a podcast so they can build a following, so they can sell sponsorships and merch and make money. And that's what most of the advice out there is for. And that's why everyone is focused on downloads, because for those two types of podcasts, downloads are very critical. But for business owners, for, say, lawyers, for PR companies, for other marketing agencies, for real estate, different metrics matter. And so over the course of our career, or the career of the lifespan of One Stone Creative, we've focused on these other metrics and these other podcasts. And so we approach everything from the purpose, from the standpoint that the podcast is not a standalone project. The podcast is a tool that a business uses to achieve other business outcomes. And so that's kind of what makes us different on a philosophical level, I think, from a lot of other podcast producers. And not to be too vain, we've also put a lot more work into establishing what those different metrics are and functionally how to track them. So that's something we take really, really, really seriously.
Yeah, I mean, working with companies or acquiring a client, they always want to know, so what's the outcome? What's the measurable outcome that we get out of that? And
Exactly.
so you can prove this would be da-da-da-da-da in a measurable
it's often
way.
not what they expect going in.
Yeah.
They often expect, we'd like to get more attention. We'd like more we'd like the downloads. We'd like to, be on the top 100. And it's like, but would you rather have an extra $60,000 a year?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, yes. So that's what we measure.
Yeah. You're opening up a larger, more holistic concept of looking at what they actually want. So they don't just see, okay, I need more engagement. There is so much more that you can do for them. And it's like, oh my God, actually, I've never thought about this. Let's do that. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I was having a conversation. This was just with a colleague, not someone we produced for it the other day, and she was talking about her show, and she's like, I don't know if I want to continue it. I don't know if it's valuable. And I was like, well, tell me how what do you know about your podcast? What do you know about how people experience your podcast? And she's like, well, I guess people do kind of regularly say, hey, I heard you through your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, but it's only like 200 downloads a month. And I said, well, in the last this year, in the last 4 months, how many of those people who have said, I found you through your podcast have become clients? And she said, well, actually 3 of them. And I said, well, how much money did you make because of those clients who found you this way? And she's like, actually, it is more than triple the amount that I spent on the podcast. Like, that's a fantastic investment of your time, a triple return. That's great.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah. I'm so happy for you that you are in this field and you found kind of a niche and the gap. And I also think it's not as a red ocean as, let's say, other industries. If we see it as a podcasting as an industry per se, that's a very specific niche that you are targeting. And I think that is really beautiful, the way of how you do it and how you,
Thank you.
You are unique, how you are relevant. Yeah, it's about relevancy. Just differentiating is not enough. It needs to be relevant for the businesses that hire you. Yeah. All right. One more question. What advice would you have for businesses looking to use podcasting as a tool for strengthening their brand identity and storytelling? Are there like 3 main pieces of advice? Either something you've mentioned already that really is crucial, or you have 2 other secrets you want to share?
Yeah, let's see here. So the one is first, start with real goals. Start with what you really need a podcast to function, because it is so easy to start a podcast and not have a clear idea of what does success mean for this project. And if you don't know what success means, you'll never know if you've reached it or not. So starting from that is probably the most important thing you can do as you're getting going. Another strategy and tip is to go out and creep the competition like mad. You will not be the first company in your industry to podcast. And you don't want to, of course, copy anyone's ideas, but getting a sense of, say, the quality standards of the audio that's being produced so that you can match it and be at the level of your kind of colleagues in your industry. Look at things like how often they're releasing. Look at what they're talking about. Look at who they're talking to. And then you can use that to either be like, this is industry standard for us and we should do it, or this is a way we can differentiate and be different. And so that's a really good way to kind of know in advance if something is more or less likely to work.
Yeah, where we are on parity in that category and where we kind of really differ and make a difference and be relevant, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just from like a functional level, if other companies in your industry are at like a level 8 or 9 of audio quality, you don't want to be releasing something at a 4.
No.
Like, it's just going to give you an idea of kind of where you should invest time and resources. And finally, I'd say make someone the talent who likes it. Because some people do podcasts for obligation, and some people may say, because I'm the owner of the company or I'm the chief executive officer, I need to be the on-air talent. But people can hear if you hate it. You cannot fake your way into, sounding authentic in someone's ears. Your tone and your emotion will come through in your voice unless you are a very good actor, and that will be exhausting because it is a lot of work. So, maybe test out different people within your company who should actually be the talent, and it should be the person who likes it the most or who hates it the least. If no one is really into it.
Yeah, and also hiring someone new doesn't really make it, because you need someone who really understands the culture, who lives and breathes the values. So it's really important that it's someone from within and who has the passion for it, I would say. It's really someone. Otherwise, you should really wait until this is something that you want to pick up at the later state in time. When people are
there
more
can be a
aware of
case
that.
sometimes for hiring a professional host. Like there are people who are professional podcast hosts and they freelance and they host various shows.
Mm-hmm.
But when that happens, then you need to kind of pick someone from within the company who's going to be going over every script and giving feedback every single time and really being involved in the pre and the post production.
Exactly.
And that's going to cost you.
Yeah.
So
If you can afford it, then you can go for it. But
Totally.
still, its authenticity shines through living
it's
it.
usually better to have someone from within the company. And it's even best if it can be someone who a customer or a new audience member would have the chance to talk to at some point. Because that knowing and liking and trusting, those parasocial relationships that are built, they're real.
Yeah.
Maybe you've noticed this when you usually have guests and you're often talking to guests, but if you ever do a solo episode, that's going to get a few more downloads. That's a few more people are going to listen. A few more people are going to respond to it. They love the host.
Yeah. It's about the person. It's about the vulnerability that we show when we do a solo episode talking about us and our perspectives. And absolutely, I totally agree with you. Yeah. All right, Megan, I would love to do a quick rapid fire terms exercise with you as a roundup for our episode. Are you ready?
Okay.
Okay.
I am.
Podcasting.
Strategy.
Confidence.
Training.
Entrepreneurship.
Scary.
Storytelling.
Difficult.
Authenticity.
Important.
And last but not least, brands. What does a brand mean to you? Why is a brand important, you think? Or is not important? I don't know.
Let me think about this one a little bit more and not give you the right off the top of my brain, because I think that's a great question. And I have been called by my business partner a reluctant brander. I always
like that.
So I've always been a little wary of brand, and I think because a lot of my earlier career was in the internet marketing industry, which was let's say there are not many great actors and many bad actors within it. So I had a kind of like don't do that. That's something, that's inauthentic and that's phony, and we don't want to do that, which I know logically is not true. And so what I've kind of come to understand and learn over the years is that the brand is just my opinion is that the brand is a solidification of what is real and what is true and what you want to communicate and how you want to communicate it. And having that codified, especially in a way that other people can understand and other people who are, like say on my team, who are kind of communicating the same brand, need to understand. So although I'm a reluctant brander, I think very much see the importance of clarifying and communicating it well.
Wow, I like that, solidifying. And you gave me another term that is going to stick. What is it? A reluctant brander, of course. So, my dear reluctant brander, where can Podcurious potential clients find you?
The best place to find us is at podcastingforbusiness.com. So there you'll find our podcast, you'll find information about production, you'll find different ways to connect with us, and tons of cool free resources if you are Podcurious and you want to check it out. So it's podcastingforbusiness.com.
Okay. Megan, thank you so much for being on my show today and sharing with us podcasting's role in business growth and how we can elevate our business brand in a noisy marketplace through a sound content strategy via podcasting. Thank you so much. It was such a joy and a pleasure hosting you today.
Oh, likewise. I feel the same way. It was such a treat to talk to you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. If you like my show, follow BrandsTalk on your preferred app, share it on social media, and if you find a minute or two, leave a quick rating or review. Thank you so much. If you want me to guide you to become a future market leader by transforming your ambitions and passion into an online brand that radiates beauty, brilliance, and authenticity, attracting the clients and recognition you deserve, drop me an email. I'd love to be your guide on your hero journey. Check out my website, bridgetbrands.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I hope you will stay tuned in on the next episode when we dive into the world of brands.